Welcome to the Lawyer for Me podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lawyer for Me podcast with attorney Kim Kollmeyer. Kim is a Missouri attorney who helps individuals and families navigate difficult legal situations, including divorce, custody, and juvenile cases. She works closely with her clients from start to finish so they don't have to go through the process alone. My name's Sean O'Connor, and today Kim and I are talking about what to expect in a Missouri divorce when kids are involved. Kim, good to see you.
Nice to meet you. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great, doing great. Now, before we get into it, how about you share a little bit about your background, the kind of work you do, the cases you handle, especially when it comes to working with families, which I know is a big part of your practice.
All right, well, fair enough. I think it's probably best to start to say that I have 4 kids of my own. So that's a pretty important factor for me. And I absolutely adore my children and kind of understand the perspective for the people coming into my office about how important their families are to them. I live on a small farm in central Missouri where I have my kids and cows and horses and goats and commute into the office on a daily basis um, and help people that are struggling with their own legal custody disputes.
Got it. Got it. So, divorce generally is, can be messy. It's probably not, not something everybody anticipates for themselves. I'm thinking, but when divorce involves children, how does that change the process compared to, say, you know, people divorcing that don't have kids?
And there's a lot of emotional capital that's involved. People come in and the most important thing in their world is on the line. And not only are they heartbroken with their own relationship that's, in tatters at that point, but they're fighting back and forth over one of the most important things in their world, which is their children. And it becomes so important. And sometimes people lose themselves in what they want for themselves and then what's best for their children. But it can just become very emotionally demanding.
Do you find that that dynamic changes depending on the age of the kids?
Well, it certainly can when you begin to talk about teenagers. Good luck having any judge tell a 17-year-old what they are or are not going to do.
Right. Yeah. How old are your kids, by the way?
Well, so I've got 2 older ones and 2 younger ones, but my older two are 21 and 19, and my younger two are 7 and 5.
Ah, yeah, that's a good little split pack. That's cool. Um, let's talk, some people watching, ultimately, when someone is just starting this process, what tends to feel the most uncertain or overwhelming at the beginning? I know you work with a lot of clients. What should people expect and perhaps not be surprised by, like, oh, I didn't expect to feel X or that this would be so difficult to navigate? Are there particular things?
And I think that people don't catch the emotional end of it. I can write this paper. I can write these papers. I can write these papers all day. I can't make decisions for people. I can advise people. I can tell them what's probably best, but ultimately they have to decide for themselves if it's time for their relationship to end or not. And usually by the time they show up in a lawyer's office, that decision has already been made. And in fact, a lot of decisions have already been made and a lot of drama has already been had. And by the time they show up at the lawyer's office, they're mad. And so they've got their feet in the mud and they've made up their decisions and they're proud and they're angry. And we come to this point where it's like, okay, we have to find a way to unravel this as gently as we can, right? And so the law says that we need to split everything equitably in half. Well, I feel like that's asking someone to cut a potted plant in half. There is no pretty way to cut a potted plant in half. And then where the children become involved, it's really it's difficult.
Hmm. Yeah, it's cliche, but of course, there's no easy or even of course, one size fits all uh, answer for sure. Um, how we're talking about Missouri, obviously. How does the court actually look at custody decisions in Missouri when both parents are involved?
There is a legal presumption that joint physical and joint legal is what's in the best interest of a child. And joint doesn't necessarily mean 50-50. We can count how many hours there are in a day, and each parent's gonna get this much, but we're aiming for that, and so we want frequent, meaningful contact for both parents, and the law assumes that that is what is best. So we're gonna walk in the door with the judge assuming that 50-50 is what's best for these kids, and it is the burden of the parent that doesn't believe that 50-50 is best to prove why 50-50 shouldn't be best. And it's not best in all situations. My experience has been that those judges are coming pretty hard in at 50-50, and we are seeing a lot of joint custody, which is good. It's good. The kids need both parents. Um, but sometimes that's not always the case, and so you need someone who's prepared to fight, to prove why it is that the law is wrong in this situation.
What would be uh, what would be a scenario where that ratio would change significantly?
Well, certainly where you see something like physical abuse,
Mm,
probably one of the more bland situations would be where one parent moves away. And it's certainly going to be held against the parent who chooses to leave the jurisdiction versus the parent who stays where they were. But when two parents live 3 hours apart, there's no way that they're going to split joint custody because the one parent can't get the kid to school on time consistently in the morning, right? And so
yeah,
in those situations, it becomes much more difficult, at least from a physical standpoint, to order joint physical custody.
yeah. I mean, there's just the simple fact of logistics in that scenario. It sounds like. Um, so moving on to where okay, I'm gonna say the they've come to your office. We're moving forward. A case is filed. What typically starts happening right away for parents?
I mean, there's usually by the time that I meet people, there's already a struggle back and forth between the kids. They're fighting, pulling the child back and forth or children back and forth between them. We need to get some kind of temporary custody order in place so that they know what time belongs to who and where the child is supposed to be when. And sometimes we need a judge that's going to say, you two are both going to be exercising time, and this is what it's going to look like. It is ideal when they can agree on what that looks like because, you know, it, the parents know the schedule. The parents know that this child has a special medical need, or that child has piano lessons on that day, or the routine events. And we can do the best we can to tell the judge about each and every little element, but inevitably we miss something and the judge issues an order and the order messes up piano lessons. And when they get along better, such that they can agree on what that order needs to look like, that works out best for everybody. But sometimes we need a judge to tell them the way it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, so just to be clear, so at that early stage, we're coming in. You mentioned sort of a temporary arrangement. So that's something that ideally you were able, with the parents to kind of negotiate or mediate up front, like, okay, until this thing gets finalized, this is how it's going to this will be the division with the children kind of thing. Is that what you're saying? Am I understanding
I'm
that?
saying that most things are negotiable. Not necessarily everything, but most things are negotiable. Even outside of custody, when we begin to talk about the property, we can say that, the house is worth this much, but then we also have 2 cars and a boat and, and the retirement account and begin to move the pieces like the Monopoly board and determine
Mhm.
who wants what and what's worth what to try to make the value balance out.
I see. I see. So as things move forward, where do people tend to get stuck, or confused when they're trying to make decisions, specifically involving their children?
Yeah, I think that it's so emotional that people lose track. Sometimes people don't think things through rationally, and I know that, sometimes they'll come in and they'll say, "Oh, we worked everything out. Here's the agreement," and they're so happy because they've worked it out, and you look it over and you're like, "Yeah, but how much is this worth? And how much is this worth? And how much is this worth? And do you realize I mean, of course they like that because, they're coming out $50,000 ahead of you, you know? And then have to sit down and say, "Is this worth the fight? Is it worth it to you to spend more on the lawyer and more emotional capital and more time in court to fight over this, or is it worth it to you to say we're getting along and we've negotiated and these are our terms?"
Hmm.
Or where the kids are involved, they're gonna fight. Um, and they're fighting for their kids, of course they are.
Let's imagine the case is moving towards resolution. What factors tend to carry the most weight in how things turn out?
I mean, again, the law is assuming it uses the word presumption. The law presumes that 50-50 is what's best for the kids. And so we're gonna look for some kind of a custody schedule where the kids are being rotated between the parents on a relatively regular basis if it's possible to do that. If one parent lives closer to the school, maybe that matters. If one parent has been more involved in doctor's appointments or more involved in educational things, maybe that matters. But perhaps maybe the other parent argues that they weren't notified about educational things or they weren't notified about medical things, or that the first parent is perhaps alienating the affections of the child, and then the first parent is going to come back and say, you had access to the school portal as much as I had access to the school portal, and the judge begins to hear those facts and determine whether it does in fact appear that one parent has been more involved. And even if the one parent was more involved, that doesn't mean the other parent shouldn't have the opportunity to be more involved. And so the courts really have been coming in pretty strongly with a joint legal, joint physical scenario.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I can imagine, just in any family unit like that, there is a division of labor of sorts. And okay, if I'm married and my wife is taking the initiative to manage the school schedule or the teacher conferences or the homework, through the portal, then I'm perhaps like, okay, that's good. She does that. She's handled. That's handled. Doesn't mean I'm not interested. And so then as we're splitting up, I could see in this, I'm like, well, no, I would like to be in the loop or, whatever the specifics are. Just because historically you haven't seen me do it, that's because you were available to handle it. Yeah.
So there is a difference between legal custody and physical custody, and I guess this might be a good moment to point that out. When we talk
Mhm.
about legal custody, we're talking about medical decisions and educational decisions and religious decisions. And so that's where we begin to talk about what's going on at the school. And maybe one parent feels like this school would be better than that school. And maybe one parent wants to pay for the more expensive school. And maybe the other parent has familial ties with the other district or whatever. Physical custody is where we're talking about the time and the schedule that the children are with each parent. And it is possible that you could end up with a situation, maybe a situation where the parents do live far apart, where one parent has sole physical custody just because of the distance, but they still have joint legal custody, which means that when you're having conversations about orthodontics, we're talking about braces, we're talking about medical stuff, that the two parents are still expected to confer between each other.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good distinction. Yeah. Physical custody versus legal custody. Well, listen, Kim, as often happens, always happens, in fact, we're pretty much out of time for this episode, but I've really enjoyed talking to you and I want to, thanks for sharing your expertise.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Well, that's it for today's episode of the Lawyer for Me podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Kim Kollmeyer and her work, visit her website, thelawyerforme.com. That's the number 4, thelawyerforme.com. I'm Sean O'Connor. Thanks for listening. And don't forget, share, subscribe, leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Maybe share a link with someone in your life who you think might benefit from this information. Have a great day.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.